Good morning, class. Welcome to the second day of learning, and today we are going to see the rest of the chapter from um, the lesson one. Okay, so bear with me as I bring up the lessons for us to study. So please open your textbooks, and we'll just do a quick recap and then move on to the rest of the lessons. Okay. We are supposed to start from here today, that is the source of studying history of modern period. However, let's do a recap. We know that there are three phases in Indian history: ancient, medieval, and modern. You studied ancient and medieval in your last 2 years, and this year we are going to study modern. And we saw the definition given by E.H. Carr regarding what is history. And then we gave an example of why we should learn history, and then we learned what is chronological writing. Then we saw that there are two different ways of history that is written in India. First one is by James Mill, and according to James Mill, in his book of A History of British India, the history is divided into Hindu, Muslim, and British period. And the second type in which Indian history is divided is into ancient, medieval, and modern, which we are studying now. And division of history is pre-independence and post-independence. And we learned about how did the transition take place from medieval to modern, and we learned that Mughals and the Delhi Sultans, the Mughal Empire, were ruling the land, and later smaller kingdoms started ruling. And then India was occupied by the traders from British, France, Portugal, and Netherlands, from which British and French stayed back and the others left. And this led to a rivalry between French and English, which is called the Anglo French rivalry. As a result of Anglo-French rivalry, there was two battles: Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey in 1757, and Battle of Buxar in 1764. The result of these two battles are the British captured the Bengal province and they made their colony in Bengal. And what happened? They established the British East India Company. And the modern period of India is starting after the British East India Company was established. Now, we learned while this was happening in India, there were other developments which was happening across the world. First one is industrial revolution. What is industrial revolution? When goods are produced by factories with the help of machines, where machines replaced men. What was the effect in India due to industrial revolution? Because there was a lot of production, now that the machines were doing the job, they needed market. So India, the colonies like India became market for such industries. The second thing is nationalism. What is nationalism? When one's feeling of love and loyalty towards their country. As nationalism arose across the world, it also came to India in the late 19th century, which led to Indians thinking of having a free state. All right, now let's move into today's lesson. That is the second part of the lesson. We will start from sources for studying the history of the modern period. Now, what are sources? Sources are uh, places, or sources are things from which we derive information. Now, this topic deals about where do we get information regarding modern period of India. Earlier we know during the medieval period or the ancient period, especially in ancient period, it was really difficult to get information. When it came to medieval period, we depended on archaeological excavations, fossil or paintings, carvings, sculptures, and writings of the court people in King's Court or things like that. We also depended on biographies of the rulers, poetry, coins, etc. However, when it comes to the modern period, there is a lot of documents that is available because during the modern period there were papers. Slowly, printing presses had began by the end of you know 19th century. So all this led to a lot of writing, which led to a lot of records, which we have as of now for knowing about the modern period. So there are a lot of documents that is available to study modern period. And because of this, we can easily reconstruct the history of India during the modern period, that is from 18th to the 20th century. Now, one of the main sources, we are going to see few of the sources. So the first one that we are going to see is books, newspapers, and magazines. By 18th century, there was a lot of production of newspaper and books because during the end of 18th century, there were already printing presses available across the world and even it had reached India. So during 18th century, we had mass production of books and papers, newspapers. Because of all these, there are, so when a newspaper or a book is produced, one copy is always preserved in the library. Hence, we have lot of information from these books, newspapers and magazines. Now, which was the first newspaper in India? It was the Bengal Gazette. Okay, do remember the name, the Bengal Gazette, which was the first newspaper in India that was published. And when was it? It was in 1780 and it was published in Kolkata. Now, moving on to the second source. Second source is government records. Now, when the British were ruling India, they had written down all the records of what was happening in the country, and as well as when Indian rulers or Indian politicians took over, and when there were leaders that were fighting for Indians' freedom, all of them made documents. Now, these documents are available at New Delhi in India and at London in England. Okay, so archives are available. So National Archives of India is at New Delhi and British India at Indian Office Records are available in London. So that those are two government records that you need to remember. National Archives of India at New Delhi and archive documents and manuscripts dealing with British India at the Indian Office records are available at Delhi. Moving on to the third source of records, that is diaries and accounts of travelers. Now, what are diaries? Diaries are usually the personal diaries that were carried by travelers. We all know that there were a lot of travelers who were visiting India and they came to India and they wrote down whatever they saw. Hence, there are a lot of diaries and accounts of such travelers or traders, missionaries, and civil servants who came to India, right? Now, all these people wrote down it in their diaries or made some records, and this was during the 18th and 19th century. Hence, such records also give us information regarding modern period. However, there is a problem with such documents. Why? Because Each of that documents is written from a personal individual's point of view. Hence, there are chances of bias. So there are chances that this diaries or the records are biased. So historians, when they read it or when they interpret it, we need to be a little careful because each person think differently, each person see things differently, which leads to bias in each of the writings of such accounts. Now, this is just a recap, the meaning of the terms of industrial revolution and nationalism. We have already learned this, so let's move to the next. The next important source is photographs, paintings, and artifacts. Now, the Britishers already had cameras, they already had uh, technology to take pictures, right? And it also reached India slowly. However, the pictures that were clicked by these Europeans reached India by 1800s. Now, what did these pictures have? These pictures had buildings, historical monuments, or places that were in India. And one such example is old photographs of monuments like the Golden Temple in Amritsar. Now, when we look at this photograph, we will get to see the difference between the old temple and the temple that is there right now. And we can see how much of changes is taking place in this particular place. So there are many such photographs. The one that you can see on the right hand side, you see the gateway of India from Mumbai. So there are a lot of photographs that was taken during this period which reached India. Now all these mark as a source to reconstruct history. Now, other than that, there are also paintings, there are also artifacts which are in India that gives us or sheds light on how India looked during those period. Now, what do we learn from all these photographs? We get to understand the society, the culture, and the economic condition of the people living in this period. Now, if we have photographs of people standing near, we will get to see what they were wearing and where they're wearing ornaments, where they're using gold, silver. So all this gives the economic status and the living standards and culture of the people. So all these photographs, paintings, and artifacts reveal such important information. So we also have examples uh, of such photographs and also such artifacts like chairs or tables or any of the furniture or vehicles, anything that were used by such people during those period is also preserved in museums. Okay, what does that help us to discover? That help us to understand the technology and the trend in those period. The next one is historical structures. Now, what is historical structure? So, structures are buildings or anything that is built by humans, especially during a period of history when a special event was taking place. That is what we call as historical structure. Now, one of the best examples of historical structure is the Gateway of India in Mumbai. We saw the picture of Gateway of India. Here it is. So, this is a historical structure because this was built for the visit of King George and Queen Mary to India in 1911. So, this entire structure was only built because King George and Queen Mary was visiting India. Hence, this becomes one of the historical structure. And there are many other historical structure which gives a fusion of British architecture and Indian architecture. For example, like the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminals, and there are other examples as well, such as Indian Gate, Rashtrapati Bhavan, or the Parliament House in Delhi. So those are few sources. Now let's see, recap on all the historical sources. What are sources? They are literature and there are literature and document sources. There are other sources like sculptures. All this gives information about the history. Now, for medieval period, we had to depend on archaeological excavations, fossils, sculptures, paintings, poetry, etc. However, for the modern period, there is a lot of documents and other sources that is available. So the first source is always books, newspapers and magazines. The primary source is any written document. So we saw how newspapers, magazines, all of them are preserved. And the first newspaper is the Bengal Gazette from in the year 1780 in Kolkata. The second is the government records. That is when the British were in India, the records that the British made, or the records that Indian citizens made, the leaders and the others wrote down. Now these go under the government records. One is archives in at India, that is in New Delhi. The second one is in London, which gives about the dealings of British when they were in India. Okay. The next one is also the written record. So that is diaries and the accounts of the travelers. What is the problem with this? Each people have written it in their own point of view, because of which there are bias. Now let's see. These are the first three written records. Do not forget, the first three are written records. First is books, newspapers and magazines. And the second literature or written record is the government records, and the third one is diaries and accounts of travelers. And these are unwritten records. First one among them is photographs, paintings and artifacts. We saw how photographs of each place is still preserved, and it gives us the difference between past and the present, and it talks about the culture, the society, the economical background of the people, and how we also understand the technology and trends of those times. And then we saw historical structures, which is built at a point of remarkable historical event. One example was Gateway of India. When was it built? In 1911. Why was it built? Because Queen Mary and King George were visiting India. And we also saw other examples such as Indian Gate, Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the Parliament House in Delhi. Let's move on to the question and answer session. First one, the Industrial Revolution occurred in England in the dash century. It's in the 18th century, option C. Please mark this in your book and write it down in your classwork. The British concept of centralized rule brought political unity and spirit of nationalism in the dash century of in India. It was during the 19th century that nationalism arose. If you remember, we spoke about it here. See, 19th century. Next question. In India, the modern period began with the establishment of Dash rule under the East India Company, British rule. Option C. The National Archives of India is located in New Delhi. We just saw that now. English and French companies both had interests in India. That's why the Anglo French rivalry. Next option. Match the following. Industrial Revolution, option D, 18th century. A History of British India. It was a book, if you remember. It was written in 1817. The Battle of Plassey is in 1757 and the Battle of Buxar is in 1764. So in the column B, the options are 2, 3, 4 and 1. True or false? The Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar gave the British complete control over the Bengal province. Is it true or false? It's true. The concept of India as one nation began to take shape under the French. It's false. What is the right answer? It began to take place under British. The archive records are secure, scarce for the study of British history in India. Absolutely no, it's false because there are lots of archive records. The Industrial Revolution led to introduction of human-made goods. False, because it led to a revolution of machine-made goods. The Anglo-French rivalry ended with the establishment of British dominion. True, because Britishers were the winners. Now, the British began their schemes of territorial expansion in India by establishing dominion over the province of Bengal, Bengal. After the Industrial Revolution, goods were manufactured in what? Where was it manufactured? It was manufactured in factories using machines. So, right, factories. Historians should interpret written sources of history with caution as they can be biased. Biased. Indian country dash of the British East India Company. India became dash of the British East India Company colony. Dash was the India's first newspaper published in 1780 from Kolkata. We read that now, it's the Bengal Gazette. We will do the question answer later. So please do complete your classworks, complete your first 3 or 4 mails that we have spoken today and write it down in your classwork and send it to me. Next, and I will send you the answers for question and answers, which you will also have to write. Okay. Well, thank you. Have a good day. Bye.